Glad to be here, not to preach, since I'm not a preacher, but to discuss with you some matters of concern to the country, to all of us, as they confront people. My discussion this afternoon is on elections, faith, and hope. Essentially, at these times, people should have hope and should not despair or lose hope in any way. It's time of elections. And elections in Kenya tend to be contentious, occasionally violent, and interesting. Elections attract neighboring states and extra-continental powers. Some of them even try to determine the outcome of Kenyan elections. Elections are associated with anxiety and fear across the country, mostly at the presidential election level. This seemingly intensifies when voters see spiritual leaders divided along political affiliations or religious, denominational, and cult lines. When religious leaders deviate from the spiritual calling in order to advance selected political interests, they abuse faith and it gives people identity that is often connected to their sense of origin. It does not matter which people throughout the world, they are interested in where they came from. And in tracing where they supposedly came from, or people go back in time to a time of one or two people, named people, identifiable, who appear to be superhumans or some sort of demigods. Their names, they could be pointed out. And beyond those demigods or superhumans, they get stuck. To get unstuck, reason tells them that God started it all by creating, placing, and instructing the first ancestor, because that person then becomes the ancestor, to do certain things. The belief in this creation, placing an instruction, then becomes an article of faith for that people. It is a core value for which they would be willing to die and to fight. Organizations then develop in order to take care of faith issues. And after that, the people feel complete and fulfilled as human. They are fulfilled humans. These organizations, to manage the affairs of faith, become religions. So religions and faith are not one and the same thing. They are different things. Faith, then, is the ultimate reason that humanizes people. Now, distinction should be made between faith on one side and dogmatism and fanaticism on the other. Here, Aurelia Augustine, better known as Saint Augustine of Hippo, was right in insisting that faith must make sense. Dogmatism or fanaticism is devoid of reason and assumes people are like sheep to be told and not to question. And so it becomes an instrument of tyranny and dictatorship in the sense that it is a political tool which demagogues love in order to exploit the led. Faith, in contrast, demands that answers be given by leaders, whether they are political or religious. Faith must make sense. If they cannot answer, then there's something wrong. Because political leaders tend to be mischievous, they spread despair and sense of hopelessness with their irresponsible utterances and actions that generate hostility and likely violence. Subsequently, people tend to trust religious leaders more than the political power wielders. This makes the religious leaders the presumed custodians of faith, the purveyors of hope, rather than despair. Faith is futuristic and goes hand in hand with hope. Hope that things will and can be better than they appear to be or are. At present in Kenya, the deteriorating economy, which is part of the global phenomenon, not unique to Kenya, makes things look bad, really bad. But things also look bad because of the anxiety that arises from the uncertainty of the coming election. There is widespread fear that violence might break out in some parts of the country. These parts are labeled hotspots. This fear has made some people try to flee the country, particularly the foreigners, who then go on home leave, or what used to be called home leave. And some of them have started stocking food that would last them for roughly a month because they are not sure what would happen. It is not quite necessary, but they are doing it. Fear also informs political inclinations, especially in the supposed hotspots areas. Only the 2007 election surpasses the 2022 election in the generated pre-election fear. Of the 22 million registered voters, roughly 19 million or less are likely to turn up. Now, this situation of fear and concern has sources, multiple sources. First, there are four presidential candidates that have been approved, but only 2 are serious: Raila Odinga and William Ruto. Now, these 2 men have records of being very rough in politics and were Pentagon comrades in 2007. They and their supporters have politically managed to split the country into virtual halves. The religious organizations are also split as they try to legitimize their preferred candidates. And in some areas, prominent musicians have taken sides as they release biting songs in praise or against one or the other. Both men show anger in public and make statements that can be inciting. Of the 2, Raila has the support of the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, which raises the lingering but divisive question of what happened to the Uhuruto brotherhood. This is unique, since no previous president has gone that far in campaigning for a presidential candidate. Although Daniel Arap Moi had identified Uhuru as his preferred successor, he stayed out of the actual campaign. Second, despite the various commissions and bodies, reform bodies that were created after the Kofi Annan mediation in 2008, there probably are people bent on getting their way, one way or the other, even including assorted violence. 1600 years ago, Augustine noted that there never lacks people who knowingly do the wrong thing. They know, but they go out of their way to violate that which has been agreed upon. Such people are clever. They are not idiots. Almost like the terrorists. They use coded language, which, when interpreted, can mean violence, can imply evictions of people. And we have already had some people saying that when they become, some people will be shown somewhere else to go. So when politicians talk of political zoning and repossessing land, fear percolates downwards in the supposed hotspots and other areas. The fact that today there is repeated violence in some parts of the country, whether on account of resource competition or political plots, that fact is worrying. And the widespread impression that security operators may be partisan does not create confidence among the voters, and it actually generates more fear. Third, there is high likelihood of a runoff, the August 9 election may not be conclusive. In part, this is because of one George Wajackoyah, the Wajackoyah factor. With the possibility of garnering 500,000 or more votes, and if Ruto and Raila are equal in terms of voter support, then Wajackoyah will deny either the 50% plus one vote requirement. His value goes up. Wajackoyah fits into a long line of political jokers and comedians who thrive in being outrageous and border on demagoguery. And he's not alone. After all, Donald Trump won the election in the US. He is likely to take more votes away from Ruto than from Raila. And his followers are mostly disillusioned Kenyans, mainly youngish, and they seem to be reggae-spirited as they enjoy ganja. Fourth, both sides give impression that Kenya might be doomed if either Ruto or Raila loses. So a sense of entitlement pervades the air, thereby making the contest a virtue or do or die affair. The Raila people claim he is entitled to be president because he is associated with past agitation for political reforms. And the Ruto people claim that he is entitled to become president because he is not dynasty and is a representative of the downtrodden. Raila attracts Kenya's middle class more than Ruto because Ruto's bottom-up slogans seemingly threaten middle-class sense of property ownership. The underclass used to belong to Raila. For a long time, he monopolized the underclass until Ruto showed up. And now the underclass tends to lean to Ruto and his hustler narrative that targets the dynasties. Fifth, the propaganda industry is doing very well. It's thriving, but it is not convincing, not always convincing. Some political leaders surprised many people when they declared themselves to be election thieves, liars, or to have lied and misled the public in the past. And they still expect the same public to believe them. The media tries to be fair, but some of their inclinations betray them. In addition, both sides have teams of fake news manufacturers in the social media. And the job is to praise one and condemn the other. And the Photoshop industry is thriving. And it takes an observant person or people some of them may be specialists in these things, to detect the fakeness. Because sometimes it's so good looking, so convincing, you believe it until somebody points out it's fake. Now, once people conclude that the media are unreliable and the leaders are also not reliable, the level of apathy is likely to rise up, which is not good for the country, because we need more people to turn up and vote. Propaganda is also unable, and media campaigns, they are unable to change those people who have already made up their minds. These are the people who insist that they do not want to be convinced, to be confused by evidence. There used to be people say, I made up my mind, don't confuse me with evidence. Those cannot be changed. Now, the picture doesn't look very good, but that does not mean that's the end. Because despite those things, things are not as bad as they look or appear to be. Therefore, there is no reason for anyone or people in the country to despair. No reason at all, even if they look bad. As a democratic country, Kenya is used to electoral challenges and has overcome worse political environments than the current ones. And some of you may reflect back, especially in the the multi-party period. There was serious violence in 1993 after the 1992 election. There was serious violence in 1998 following the 1997 elections. And there was the best known of these violence in 2007. Associated with that election. And the violence had started long before the election. It was there during the election and intensified after the election. In fact, some people did not vote in their stations because they had to create special voting booths in some places to accommodate them. So the phrase that is usually used, post-election violence, is a misnomer, is a terminological cover-up to hide the fact that violence had been orchestrated and had started long before the election. But Kenya went through that and survived. And it's going to survive the current anxiety. So Kenya is used to these things, and we will survive. Kenyans generally look for assurances that the country is safe. And since politicians have tended to discredit themselves with their flip-flops, attention turns to alternative sources of guidance, those that people can trust. The alternative sources are those who still command respect, because of their maturity and perceived inability to mislead. They use and need faith in order to give hope. While some religious organizations might have discredited themselves by anointing people of questionable merit, there are many, in fact, the most of them, who still command trust, and people listen to them when they speak. And those should continue speaking because people will listen. Those kind of people cut across religious and other groups and have faith in Kenya as an entity. These people do not lie to the public and have ability to exude confidence because they have believability. They promote hope, not despair. There, therefore, should be no fear in Kenya that things will go wrong. People should vote for the best candidate that each knows of, not necessarily the one dictated to. They should have faith that the collective voter wisdom will prevail. Out of the 18 or 19 or whatever number turns out, their collective wisdom cannot be wrong. So should accept it and move on. Faith gives hope for people to overcome challenges and to ensure that Kenya remains intact. So the message is, go and vote in faith and confidence that all will be well, and it will be well. Faith is the ultimate reason, so have no fear. Thank you.